Okay, hello everyone. I just want to talk a little bit about political polarization here. This will take a little while to do, but it's going to be, I think, helpful to you. Now, in the previous assignments, what we did was look at how the country is divided today along liberal versus conservative lines, urban versus rural, and all that. And that's just a snapshot of the way things are now. What I want to do here is talk about how we got here. So I'm going to give you some of the history, and hopefully that will be helpful to you in formulating your answer about the question of how COVID has exposed our differences. You don't need to know this exactly, like for a test purpose, but 1945, I believe, to be the key year here. From 33 to 45, or even from 29 to 45, those were pivotal years. America by 1945 was much different. And the reason is two major events that happened. One is the Great Depression, which started in 1929 and which was a terrible economic problem for this country. You've probably heard of it before. And then the second thing was World War II, which happened right on the back of that. By the end of those two major events, America was a different place than it was before. And the liberals of today and the conservatives of today, we can kind of see their differences when we kind of look in this post World War II world. And so that's where I'm going to kind of start off. But let's first review and reiterate the differences between liberals and conservatives, which you've seen in the other assignment, but let's do it again. All right. Remember that liberals believe that a strong federal government should be used to solve social and economic problems. So when there's a problem out there in the world, liberals will tend to look to the federal government to solve that problem because they believe that the federal government is the only thing that's really strong enough to right certain kinds of wrongs. Okay, and in particular, they think that the kinds of things that the government should be doing is looking at inequality between the rich and the poor, and between the races and between the genders. So whenever a liberal sees inequality, they want to use the government to shrink that inequality somehow or another, right? They don't believe that these inequalities can shrink on their own through like good vibes or something. They think that the federal government is necessary to, their action is necessary, for example, to tax the rich and help use that tax money to help the poor in different ways, or to ensure that nobody is that companies are not discriminating against people of different races and genders and so on. And so the government would step in and punish people if they do that kind of thing. Liberals believe the government is absolutely critical for that role. And liberals also tend to think of things like healthcare, racial inequality as important issues. So if you ask a liberal what's important to you, these two things will probably come up. Okay. On the other hand, the conservatives believe that the federal government should not be too much involved in solving problems. They believe that the government is more likely to cause problems than to solve them. They would like to see people free to sort of solve their own problems for themselves. Like, for example, let's say that I wanted to get some sort of like, I want to make French fries at home, so I want to get like a deep fryer type thing. I don't know how to do it. I want to get like a fryer thing to put in my kitchen, right? And I want one tomorrow. So how am I supposed to do that? Well, you know what you can do? Amazon has figured out a way, if I have a Prime membership, to get me that fryer in one day. Can you believe that? Conservatives say, see, that's exactly right. When you let people come up with their own businesses and their own ideas, problems just get solved, right? And everyone wins. I get my deep fryer in one day. Somebody gets a job making that deep fryer and delivering it to me. Amazon gets money. Everyone is happy. And that's how conservatives would want problems to be solved, is through that sort of process. Okay. Conservatives are also, they tend to focus in on the economy as their most important thing. They think that if people are free to make their own businesses, get their own jobs and all that kind of thing, things will just kind of work out for the best. Okay. So they very much care about helping businesses and so on. Conservatives think that economic growth and fighting crime are important issues. We're not talking about all the differences between liberals and conservatives, but just the ones that are sort of relevant to this COVID situation that we have now. All right, now we're going to go into some of the history. Oh, before we do that, let's just take a look at, here's some data to show you that I'm right. Look here, the economy. Um, like I said, if you're a Trump supporter, you care very much about the economy. That's very important to you. Biden supporters, not as much, although it's just still a very strong number. And I think that's because of how COVID has messed around with the economy a lot. Everyone is caring about this issue, but this differential between Democrats and Republicans is pretty much to be expected. And look here, healthcare. Biden supporters, more liberal people, they care about healthcare. They want a solution. They want the government to get involved, right? Conservatives, much less so. Same thing for the coronavirus outbreak. This 82% of Biden supporters caring very much um, about the coronavirus, right? Shows that they're looking for a strong government solution and they don't feel like they're getting it out of Trump. Looking down here at race and ethnic inequality, you can see that Biden supporters care very much about race and ethnic inequality, and conservatives less so. Conservatives might be more inclined to say that race and economic or ethnic inequality isn't a big issue. Similarly, economic inequality is something that Democrats and liberals will look at as a big problem. Republicans less so. Conservatives, Republicans, they don't care as much about economic inequality because conservatives believe that if people are free to get their own jobs, do their own business, and you just kind of leave people alone to make money, some people will naturally be rich and some people will be poor because that's just how the cookie of talent crumbles. And they're okay with that. They don't see that as a problem, whereas liberals will see that as a problem in a variety of ways. Okay, so as you can see, Republicans and Democrats just care about different things too. Some things they both care about, like Supreme Court appointments, but that's for you can learn about that in government class next year. Okay, let's start looking at history now, and we're going to look at Franklin Roosevelt first. This is the first really big liberal that we're going to look at, and he came to the presidency at a time when America was in the Great Depression. The economy was collapsing. People didn't have jobs, struggled to eat, and for a very long time. I mean, it wasn't like 6 months. I mean, it was for years. And so Franklin Roosevelt's idea was we need a strong federal government to come in to help the poorer people get back on their feet, to get the economy going. The economy isn't going to fix itself. Conservatives believe that the economy will fix itself. It'll go down, but it'll go back up again. And Roosevelt was coming in saying, well, not necessarily. It could just go down and stay down. And sometimes you need the government to lift it back up again. Okay, so that's what he did, is that he used the government to help out poor people and to try to lift the economy. A lot of people, there's a lot of debate as to whether or not that worked, but that's for another time. What happened as a result of Roosevelt was that many urban and working class factory workers really liked what Roosevelt was doing. They really felt like Roosevelt helped them. And so they became Democrats, or they just became more devoted to being on the liberal side of economic issues. So people who live in cities and work in factories vote Democrat. And Roosevelt had a lot to do with winning their support. Okay. I paused it there, and now, because I don't have this whole thing set up, I don't know what I'm doing, frankly, and so everything might be a little weird. It might be weird. This whole thing is weird. I mean, this whole all right. Anyway, here's Lyndon Johnson. So he was a close talker, and Lyndon Johnson was your next big liberal here. He was president from these years, and he sort of followed along with Roosevelt and used the government to help poor people. Medicare, Medicaid comes out of Lyndon Johnson's presidency. He called it a war on poverty and thought it was very important for the government to very strongly get involved in helping people who had less. And so he did that. Now, the other thing that's important about Lyndon Johnson is that he passed the Civil Rights Act, which ended the legal segregation in this country, and some of the other acts as well, and which we'll talk about in a later unit. But the Democrats, as being the party that fights racial inequality, by the time Johnson is through, the Democrats are that party. Okay. Because Lincoln was a Republican for a very long time, Black Americans voted Republican. That started to change with Roosevelt, but by the time Johnson was through, Black Americans became Democrats in very large numbers, like 90% or so. So you can see that the big government solutions is a liberal thing. Johnson helped to continue that trend. And also, you see the voting base of the Democratic Party changing too. So you still have the factory and urban people voting Democrat, and now you have Black Americans joining into that Democratic Party coalition. Then we'll skip forward all the way to Barack Obama. Barack Obama really continues the liberal focus on a strong government to solve problems, on healthcare with Obamacare, and on racial equality issues where President Obama spoke up about those kinds of things. So he continues in the line of these liberals. But what's important with the Obama time is that we can see kind of how Americans have solidified in their differences, so that Democratic voters are uh, concentrated in city areas in the Northeast, the West Coast, and the Midwest. So let's have a look here. This is the 2012 map when Barack Obama beat Mitt Romney. Okay. And so you can see the regional divide. The Northeast of the country, totally blue for Obama. The West Coast, up and down the West Coast, blue for Obama. And then you can see here in the Midwest, it's mostly going to be for Obama. You got Indiana there, but um, so you can see that the country is now dividing, and people who live in urbanized areas in the cities, like New York City, Boston's over here. Connecticut is pretty urbanized or suburbanized. Connecticut is like a big suburb for New York City. New Jersey is the same. It's either a suburb for New York City or it's a suburb for Philadelphia. And so these urban areas remain Democrat. And then, of course, California is very urbanized along the coast. If you look at California, these areas will be very blue. And then as you get into the interior, it becomes redder. Okay. Same thing here in Oregon and Washington. Like Washington, Seattle is very blue, very Democrat. But if you get out to this part of Washington state, you start becoming more Republican. So that urban rural thing that I talked about before, you can see that through Obama's presidency, and it's not that Obama made it this way. It's just that it becomes much clearer as his presidency goes along. These are things that have been happening for a while, but you can see the geographic divisions here. Okay, let's go over to the conservatives. The first conservative is Richard Nixon. We're going to look at now. A lot of conservatives will tell you, like, oh, he wasn't really a conservative. He didn't cut taxes much, didn't cut spending, and that's true. But what made him conservative, one, is that he focused a lot on law enforcement, law and order. He would tweet law and order if he were alive today. If he were the president today, he would also be tweeting law and order 7 or 8 times a day. And then the other thing about Nixon was that this map here of appealing to the South, Nixon really tried to appeal to the South, people who were white Southerners who were not happy about the civil rights movement. Nixon tried to bring them over, and he basically succeeded. Okay, so Nixon helped to win voters in the South and in the Midwest. Then Reagan is the sort of the biggest conservative of them all, because he's kind of did everything the conservatives wanted. I mean, he pushed for tax cuts, domestic spending cuts. He said that government is not the solution to the problem. Government is the problem. So this idea that the federal government should step back from solving problems, very much a Reagan conservative point of view. Okay, so if you're the type of person who feels like you like Reagan and you feel like the government shouldn't be solving problems, try to apply that to the Corona thing and mask mandates and all that. Okay, and so Reagan also continued the Nixon Southern strategy to appeal to Southern and more rural voters. Okay, then there's George W. Bush, continues to cut taxes and support big business. The other thing about Bush is that he himself was a Christian, evangelical Christian. He tried and succeeded in appealing to religious Christian voters. Okay, and Bush's people were basically from the south and from the Mountain West. So let's take a look at the Bush map here. This is the Bush map, and he won in 2004, right? Similar to 2008, the liberals are good in the Northeast, they're good on the West Coast, and the Midwest is a little bit more divided with Bush. Okay, Bush wins Ohio and he wins Florida down here, which helps him to win. But you can see that the base of Republican support is in the South here. This stuff doesn't change. Texas, and then up into the Mountain West. This is what we call the Mountain West. Okay. So the division between the mostly urban areas going Democrat with the more or the less urban areas going Republican, we can see that Bush, and then remember Obama comes right after Bush, right? So, okay. So that's the kind of the history of how it got to be that Democrats appealed to urban voters, African American voters, and so on. Republicans appeal more to the rural type voters, the Midwest type, some of the Midwest type voters, white voters in particular as well, because about somewhere between like, it depends on the year, but anywhere between 55 to 60% of white people vote Republican. I think it topped out at like 60 for Mitt Romney. Okay, so some controversial points about COVID. And so now let's bring it back to the present day. So COVID raises a few questions. Because the government is basically saying you need to wear a mask, right? The side that trusts government is probably going to be more likely to listen than the side that doesn't, right? So we can see that, Reagan says government's the problem, but then if it's on the conservative side, but on the liberal side, you have, Lyndon Johnson, you got Barack Obama believing in strong government action to solve problems. So you can see that division there. People who are conservative are going to be less likely to listen to the government and believe that the government can actually, solve this problem. Healthcare versus economy, right? Shutting down, as we all know from just people we know in our life and just looking around, for a while there, for a couple of months, economic activity shut down throughout the country. And so the side that really believes that we should always be looking to grow the economy, they're going to be uneasy. They're going to feel uncomfortable about things that will shut down the economy, right? But people who prioritize healthcare, they may not like shutting down, not that they would like shutting down the economy, but they're willing to think about it more. Okay. So you can see the liberal conservative divide there. And also, where did COVID come first into the United States? COVID first came to the United States, in the cities, like New York City was hit pretty hard. It's eventually going to end up everywhere in America, but where it comes first kind of matters in terms of how people understand what it is they're supposed to do. So when you think about where COVID is happening a lot, what's going to be the response to people versus where COVID hasn't really come very much, right? And how they're going to view the importance of wearing masks and so on. And then finally, and this is an interesting point too, as this summer has worn on, we can also see what we should do about the COVID problem. And then, of course, when is it okay to break the restrictions, or when should the restrictions of COVID give way to some other priority? Protests over George Floyd, religious worship, personal liberty, and so on. So you can see that while people on the left generally do support strong government action, social distancing, and the masks and all that, they are willing to perhaps break those rules for a priority of theirs is very strong, which would be protesting against racial injustices. But if you're on the conservative side, the idea that you can't go to church for a while, that's going to be more important to you. So you're going to be thinking to yourself, hey, I should go to church if you're conservative. So you're more willing to break the restrictions for that kind of thing, right? And then also for the conservatives, that sort of personal liberty thing of like, hey, I should be able to do what I want without restriction. So these are some controversial points that you can use in your essay. I feel like this has gone on long, and so I don't want to make this too long, but these are complicated issues. The important thing that you want to do, that you want to get out of this, is to say, okay, how is it that liberals and conservatives are looking at this problem differently, in terms of demographically, urban versus rural type stuff, and in terms of what liberals care about versus what conservatives care about. And you want to use that information as you get going on your essay. All right, that's enough for me, and I will see you later.